So when this starts off, it may not immediately sound like it's talking about Dhamma, but give it a few minutes, you'll see. So the Buddha says, monks, when a royal frontier citadel has been well equipped with 7 kinds of citadel equipment and can easily obtain 4 kinds of supplies without any trouble or difficulty, then that royal frontier citadel cannot be conquered by external enemies. What are the 7 kinds of citadel equipment it has been well equipped with? Here, monks, a royal frontier citadel has support pillars, which are deeply rooted, well-grounded, immovable, unshakable. This is the first kind of citadel equipment, which allows a royal frontier citadel to protect its residents and repel outsiders. Also, monks, a royal frontier citadel has a moat, which is deep and wide. This is the second kind of citadel equipment, which allows a royal frontier citadel to protect its residents and repel outsiders. Also, monks, a royal frontier citadel has a watchman's walkway, which is high and wide. This is the third kind of citadel equipment, which allows a royal frontier citadel to protect its residents and repel outsiders. Also, monks, a royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of weapons, arrows, and javelins. This is the fourth kind of citadel equipment, which allows a royal frontier citadel to protect its residents and repel outsiders. Also, monks, a royal frontier citadel has a large army living in it. Elephant riders, horse riders, archers, heralds, skirmishers, provisioners, princes, assault troops, veterans, heroes, shield bearers, and indentured troops. This is the fifth kind of citadel equipment, which allows a royal frontier citadel to protect its residents and repel outsiders. Also, monks, a royal frontier citadel has a gatekeeper who is wise, competent, and intelligent, who keeps out those who are unknown and lets in those who are known. This is the sixth kind of citadel equipment, which allows a royal frontier citadel to protect its residents and repel outsiders. Also, monks, a royal frontier citadel has a wall, which is tall, wide, and solidly mortared. This is the seventh kind of citadel equipment, which allows a royal frontier citadel to protect its residents and repel outsiders. These are the 7 kinds of citadel equipment it has been well equipped with. So far, you're probably thinking, why is the Buddha giving advice on warfare? The Buddha used all manner of similes to try to communicate the Dhamma. And often he would refer to things which were ordinary aspects of people's everyday lives. So he would use metaphors related to farming, to agriculture, to horse training. The very, very many suttas, the Buddha uses the simile of training horses as a way of talking about how we train the mind, how we train monks, how we train lay practitioners, how we train ourselves. And also the Buddha frequently used similes related to military. So this also was a major element of life in ancient India, was there was constant warfare. So at the time, India was composed of dozens of very small nations, which were more or less constantly at war with each other. And the Buddha himself was from a military aristocratic family, which itself was from a nation that was constantly at war with other nations. So he would have been very familiar with military tactics and different aspects of defending a nation, and probably also with the tactics of attacking other nations. And this was something which most people would have had some familiarity with, since warfare was an ordinary part of life at that time. Not so different from these days, actually. So he's using here a set of similes which people could easily understand. Can easily understand how, in order to, if you have a town or a city or a fortress on the edge of your territory, where it's close to enemy territory and maybe constantly getting attacked, then you need to make sure that it's well equipped so that it will be safe and well protected. So the Buddha is listing 7 aspects, 7 things which a frontier citadel needs in order to be safe. But of course, if you have all the equipment in the world, but your people are starving, then that's not going to work either. So the Buddha then speaks about 4 kinds of supplies. He says, what are the 4 kinds of supplies which it can easily obtain without any trouble or difficulty? Here amongst the royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of grass, wood, and water, so that the residents can be happy, unworried, and comfortable when repelling outsiders. So in other words, material which can be used for construction, which can be used for cook fires, cooking food. Water, of course, is a critical necessity. So these are your basic needs for survival. He says, also amongst the royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of rice and grain, so that the residents can be happy, unworried, and comfortable when repelling outsiders. Also amongst the royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of seeds, beans, nuts, and legumes, so that the residents can be happy, unworried, and comfortable when repelling outsiders. Also amongst the royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of medicines, such as ghee, butter, oil, honey, sugar cane, and salt, so that the residents can be happy, unworried, and comfortable when repelling outsiders. Amongst these are the 4 kinds of supplies, which it can easily obtain without any trouble or difficulty. In other words, you need to have a wide supply of different kinds of foods and medicines, so that if the city comes under siege, then you can keep all of your residents and soldiers well fed and well taken care of. Historically, one of the ways that enemies would conquer a fortified city was just to surround it so that nobody can get in or out, and wait until the people inside the city run out of food. When they run out of food, then they surrender. So often a siege could be won without any combat happening at all, just by waiting for the defenders to run out of food. So the Buddha here emphasizes the importance of having a plentiful supply of foods and medicines, and many different kinds of foods, so that your people don't get malnourished. So then the Buddha recaps. He says, monks, when a royal frontier citadel has been well equipped with these 7 kinds of citadel equipment and can easily obtain these 4 kinds of supplies without any trouble or difficulty, then, monks, it is called a royal frontier citadel that cannot be conquered by external enemies. So those of you who are familiar with the suttas may already be speculating as to what the 7 kinds of equipment and the 4 kinds of supplies might be about to be used as metaphors for. So the Buddha continues. He says, in the same way, monks, when a disciple of the noble ones has 7 good qualities and can easily obtain the 4 jhanas, superior mind states which are visibly pleasant, without any trouble or difficulty, then, monks, they are called a disciple of the noble ones who cannot be affected by Mara, who cannot be affected by the evil one. So here he's beginning to draw the central simile of the discourse. So saying that there are 7 wholesome qualities of mind, which are related to each of the 7 kinds of citadel equipment. And then the 4 kinds of supplies are the 4 jhanas. So the 4 jhanas are states of concentration, so states of meditation, which are necessary for stabilizing the mind so that liberating insight can arise. And just as a well-fortified and well-supplied city cannot be conquered by external enemies, in the same way, when our mind has these 7 good qualities and is able to enter the 4 jhanas, then we cannot be conquered by Mara. We are immune to the temptations and deceptions of Mara. So Mara as we've spoken about in the past. Mara is a very powerful deva who has made it his personal mission to impede people from practicing Buddhism. So he's generating a tremendous amount of bad karma. So we have many, many suttas which involve Mara coming and trying to stop the Buddha from teaching, or stop people from listening to the Buddha, or planting false ideas in people's minds, trying to confuse them, or put misunderstandings in them, or fuel their doubts, or fuel their greed or their fear. And in some places, Mara is also used as a metaphor for our own internal defilements. So the way that we deceive and tempt and trick ourselves into doing unwholesome things, or into wasting time, or into slacking off in our practice, or into doing irrelevant or tangential activities. But either way, whether we're talking about Mara as an actual sentient being who comes and harasses us, or if we're talking about Mara as our own internal defilements and unwholesome tendencies, either way, when we have these 7 good qualities and have developed strong enough samadhi that we can access the 4 jhanas, either way, we will be immune to Mara. We will be immune to these forces of temptation and deception. So the Buddha continues. He says, what are the 7 good qualities that they have? So, just checking the Pali here. Seven good qualities, by the way. So good quality here is a translation of the word saddhamma. So normally when we see the term saddhamma, it's talking about the true teaching or the good teaching. But here it seems to be referring to qualities of mind in general, rather than specifically to a teaching of any sort. So that's why it's translated here as 7 good qualities rather than as 7 good teachings. So the Buddha says, monks, just as a royal frontier citadel has support pillars which are deeply rooted, well-grounded, immovable, and unshakable in order to protect its residents and repel outsiders, in the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones has faith. Faith in the Tathagata's awakening. So that's Tathagata bodhing. So faith in the Tathagata's awakening. Faith that the Buddha is enlightened. So a disciple of the noble ones has faith in the Tathagata's awakening. He is the fortunate one, the worthy one, the rightly self-awakened one, with perfect knowledge and conduct, the sublime one, the world knower, the unsurpassed trainer of trainable people, the teacher of angels and humans, the awakened one, the fortunate one. So that's a standard list of the 9 qualities of the Buddhas. Itipiso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho, etc. And the Buddha says, monks, with faith as their pillar, a disciple of the noble ones abandons the unwholesome and develops the wholesome, abandons what is blameworthy and develops what is blameless, and maintains their own purity. This is the first good quality that they have. So the support pillars of a structure are similar to the foundations of a building. So the support pillars are large, heavy pillars which are driven deep into the ground so that they're effectively unmovable, unshakable. And then your structures, your walls, your buildings are all attached to those support pillars, so that the sturdiness, the immovability of the support pillars then gives sturdiness to all of your walls and buildings. If your support pillars are not deeply rooted, then your walls can be knocked down much more easily. Your buildings are much more fragile. But if your support pillars are very deep and strong, then that will give strength to everything else that you build. So in the same way here, the Buddha is saying that the most foundational quality of our practice is faith. Faith in the awakening of the Buddha. Faith that the Buddha is an enlightened being. Faith in the 9 qualities of the Buddha. That he has both perfect knowledge and perfect conduct. In other words, his behavior is completely purified, completely blameless, completely faultless. And his understanding of the path to enlightenment is also completely flawless. You can't say that there's anything related to the path to enlightenment. You can't say there's anything about the path which the Buddha doesn't know. So if one has faith that the Buddha was enlightened, then we will take his teachings seriously and we will apply them diligently. If we do not have faith that the Buddha was enlightened, then we will not take the Dhamma seriously, and we will not practice sincerely. So this is why it's singled out as a critical quality. So people who come from Buddhist cultures often already have faith well established from the time they're very young. Those of us who come to Buddhism later in life usually don't start with this degree of strong faith. It has to be nurtured and developed and built up. So we build up this faith through, first and foremost, through studying the suttas. So one of the most profoundly impactful things that I've done in my Buddhist practice was to read through all the suttas. So it sounds like a simple thing, but in the course of reading through the suttas, it becomes more and more clear that the teachings in the suttas come from a fully enlightened being. It becomes more and more clear that this must have been produced by a mind of infinite wisdom. So faith in the awakening of the Buddha is something which is nurtured through studying the suttas. And then when we take those teachings and apply them to our lives, we see that they work. We see that they're true. We see that they're practical. And we see that they bring genuine relief from suffering, genuine increase in wisdom, genuine transformation of our character of mind. So then our faith becomes even stronger through recognizing the applicability and validity of the Buddha's teachings. So in this way, we nurture our faith. We build up our faith. We cultivate our faith through studying the suttas and putting them into practice in our lives. And it's very important when studying the suttas to read the suttas not with a fault-finding mind, not trying to find errors or things to criticize or to be skeptical about, but rather to read the suttas with the mind of looking to see, is there something useful to me in here? Is there something here which is relevant to my own life? Is there something here which illuminates my own mind? Is there something here which can help me on the path? So in this way, the suttas are relevant to us. They're useful to us. The suttas are meant to be a tool of self-reflection, like looking in a mirror, so that you can see what needs to be done. So then the next simile, so the first one was having faith as one's foundation pillars. Next, he says, just as a royal frontier citadel has a moat, which is deep and wide, in order to protect its residents and repel outsiders, in the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, has conscience. So the Pali for this is hiri. And there's debate about how to properly translate the word hiri. I like conscience. But commonly you'll see it translated as moral shame. So this sense of the degradation caused to ourselves by doing any kind of unwholesome act, any kind of nurturing any kind of defilement. So conscience is your innate sense of wholesome and unwholesome, which leads you to avoid doing unwholesome things. One of the similes the Buddha uses is just as if somebody hung a dead snake around your neck, you would be repelled, disgusted, and humiliated. In the same way, if you realize that you're heaping unwholesome mind states on yourself, that you're nourishing your own greed, hatred, and delusion, then similarly, there's a sense of repulsion, disgust, humiliation. Like, what am I doing to myself? Why am I nurturing my own unwholesome qualities? Why am I smearing feces on my own mind? It's just disgusting. So recognizing that we're just polluting our own mind then leads us to ceasing those activities, ceasing the nourishment of unwholesome mind states. So the point of a moat is that a moat keeps your enemies far away from the city. It makes it so the enemies can't get even close to the city. So in the same way, conscience, this knowing of the unwholesome and the wholesome, this tendency to avoid doing any kind of unwholesome activity that would pollute our own mind, that keeps us far away from defilement, far away from confusion. So he says, a disciple of the noble ones has conscience, conscientiously avoiding physical, verbal, and mental misconduct, conscientiously avoiding harmful, unwholesome things. Monks with conscience as their moat, a disciple of the noble ones abandons the unwholesome and develops the wholesome, abandons what is blameworthy and develops what is blameless, and maintains their own purity. This is the second good quality that they have. So note that he emphasizes avoiding physical, verbal, and mental misconduct. So we avoid doing harmful things, we avoid saying harmful things, and we also avoid producing harmful thoughts and mind states. And the next one, he says, monks, just as a royal frontier citadel has a watchman's walkway, which is high and wide in order to protect its residents and repel outsiders. So watchman's walkway was a raised walkway all around the border of a fortress, which people would patrol along it and constantly be watching out so that they would be able to see any enemies coming from far away. So watchman's walkway, by the way, is a translation of the Pali word anupariyayapato, which more literally means circular path. So I spent a lot of time trying to find the technical term for the walkway which goes around the outer wall of a castle or fortress. And there are technical terms, but they all just ultimately mean circular path. They're just Latin or French or Italian words that mean circular path. So apparently this was just well understood that when you said circular path, you meant the watchman's walkway around the perimeter of a castle. Anyway, so just as a royal frontier citadel has a watchman's walkway, which is high and wide in order to protect its residents and repel outsiders, in the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones has consideration, which is ottappa in Pali, considerately avoiding physical, verbal, and mental misconduct, considerately avoiding harmful, unwholesome things. Monks with consideration as their watchman's walkway, a disciple of the noble ones abandons the unwholesome, develops the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy, develops the blameless, and maintains their own purity. So Hiri and Ottappa are these two qualities which are usually given together. Rarely are they separated, and when they are separated, it's usually only Hiri that's mentioned. So Hiri or conscience is either a part of the two, so Hiri Ottappa, conscience and consideration, or if you see just Hiri by itself, it can usually be understood to be including both qualities. When distinguishing between the two, usually the explanation is that Hiri is avoiding doing things that harm yourself. So basic understanding that when we do unwholesome things, it hurts ourselves. And Ottappa is avoiding doing unwholesome things that harm others. So recognizing that when we engage in unwholesome conduct, it negatively affects the people around us as well. So together, Hiri and Ottappa are avoiding doing anything that would harm either ourselves or others. So it's this basic recognition of the moral quality of our decisions, and the tendency to shrink away from unwholesome things, evil things, and to gravitate towards wholesome things, good things. The fourth quality, the Buddha says, just as a royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of weapons, arrows, and javelins in order to protect its residents and repel outsiders, in the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones has a lot of information, maintains information, stockpiles information about those teachings which are good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in their conclusion, well worded and well phrased, proclaiming a completely perfect and pure spiritual life. These are the kinds of teachings which they have a lot of information about, which they have maintained, verbally recited, mentally examined, and well comprehended with vision. Monks, with information as their weapon, a disciple of the noble ones abandons the unwholesome, develops the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy, develops the blameless, and maintains their own purity. I find this one particularly sweet. So just as a castle or a fortress stockpiles a lot of weapons, so they have lots of ways of fending off their enemies. In the same way, a Buddhist practitioner stockpiles dhammas. They stockpile information about the Buddha's teachings. So the Pali word here is, let me just find it. Bahusutta. So Bahusutta, sutta literally means heard. So things that you've heard, things that you've learned. So Bahusutta means you've learned a lot of Dhamma. You've heard a lot of Dhamma. And in those days, most people were illiterate, so learning things was done by hearing, listening to recitations of the Buddha's discourses. These days you can read. So it's a similar way of accumulating information. So again, emphasizing here, the Buddha says to make an effort to stockpile knowledge of the Dhamma. So not just learning a little tiny bit, but really making an effort to learn a lot about what the Buddha said. And not just to learn a lot about it, but to remember it, to recite it, to examine it with your mind. So deeply considering the implications of the Buddha's teachings, deeply considering the meaning of the different aspects of Dhamma. So not settling with just a superficial understanding, but trying to cultivate a deep understanding of the Buddha's teachings. So never assuming that we already understand enough, but always looking more deeply. Remember that if we fully understood the Dhamma, we would be enlightened. So clearly we don't quite get it yet. So it's good to constantly ponder and consider and contemplate the Dhamma, and see if there's something more that we don't quite understand yet. And also to discuss it with others, and especially to discuss it with others who are more knowledgeable, more experienced, more well-practiced than we are, so that we can gain from their experience, their practice. Then the fifth simile, he says, just as a royal frontier citadel has a large army living in it, such as elephant riders, horse riders, etc., in order to protect its residents and repel outsiders, in the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones lives with energy for abandoning unwholesome things and for committing to wholesome things, resolute, determined, and unrelenting regarding wholesome things. Monks, with energy as their army, a disciple of the noble ones abandons the unwholesome and develops the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy and develops the blameless, and maintains their own purity. So this fifth quality, so we make a constant ongoing effort to cultivate wholesome mind states and to abandon unwholesome mind states. And here the Buddha is analogizing that to an army. So an army with, interestingly enough, he gives a lot of variety of different kinds of troops that one might have. So in the same way, we cultivate a variety of wholesome mind states. And we're also constantly on the lookout for a variety of unwholesome mind states. So trying to keep a broad understanding of what brings the mind towards awakening. So not having too narrow an opinion. So this naturally develops from the previous quality, the quality of having a lot of information about the Dhamma. If we only know one meditation method and we only know one sutta, then our understanding of how to cultivate the wholesome and abandon the unwholesome will be similarly extremely narrow and limited, and therefore not very effective. Many years ago, I met a young man who, at that time, he was staying at the monastery I was at, and he said he wanted to be a monk. And we were talking one day, and I mentioned that I had been reading through the Sutta Pitaka. And his answer was, well, I've read the Satipatthana Sutta, and that's the only sutta you need to read. And I just keep rereading it. I don't bother to read any other suttas because you only need the Satipatthana Sutta. And I was like, I don't think so. I don't think that's enough. It's a good sutta. It's a great sutta, in fact. There's lots of really good content in the Satipatthana Sutta. But if that's your only way of understanding the Dhamma, if you don't bother to read anything else, then you're going to have a pretty narrow understanding of what Buddhism is. Now, admittedly, if you're going to only pick one sutta in the entire canon, the Satipatthana is a pretty good one to pick, especially the Mahasatipatthana Sutta. It's just packed with content, really good content. But it's not enough. By itself, it's not enough. You need an understanding, a broad and thorough understanding of the Buddha's teachings. Similarly, this person had learned one particular meditation method, and that was the only method they would use. And then a few months later, he left the monastery, and we never heard from him again. Decided he didn't want to be a monk after all, and went off and did whatever people do. So I continue to be somewhat doubtful about his Satipatthana-only approach to studying Dhamma. Anyway, point being is to have a broad understanding of the Dhamma so that we can combat unwholesome tendencies in any way that they appear, that we're constantly on the lookout for them. And we have a variety of tools that are relevant to the occasion. Then the sixth quality, he says, monks, just as a royal frontier citadel has a gatekeeper who is wise, competent, and intelligent, who keeps out those who are unknown and lets in those who are known, in order to protect its residents and repel outsiders, in the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, has mindfulness, the utmost refinement of mindfulness, and remembers even what was done and said long ago. Monks with mindfulness as their gatekeeper, a disciple of the noble ones, abandons the unwholesome and develops the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy and develops the blameless, and maintains their own purity. So the sixth quality is mindfulness, which here is analogized to the gatekeeper. So the gatekeeper is the person who decides who comes into the city and who is kept out of the city. So in the same way, we have to closely watch our mind at all times. We have to closely pay attention to our body and mind so that we can see what we're letting in. We can see what we're cultivating. What mind states, what thoughts, what emotions are we nourishing and feeding? What activities are we engaging in with our body and our speech? If we aren't fully aware of our activities, if we aren't clearly aware of our choices, then it's very difficult to make good choices. If we aren't clearly aware, then we'll tend to run on our habits and instincts. And our habits and instincts are not in line with the Buddhist path. Not until you become a stream enterer do your habits and instincts start to become reliable. So before you reach the first stage of awakening, our habits and instincts are connected with defilement. They're connected with delusion. So we need to pay very close attention to our body, our speech, and our mind, so that we can see what's good and what's bad, so that we can correct our misconduct and cultivate good conduct. Then the last of these 7 equipment similes, the Buddha says, just as a royal frontier citadel has a wall which is tall, wide, and solidly mortared, in order to protect its residents and repel outsiders, in the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones has wisdom, the wisdom which knows arising and vanishing, and which leads to the noble breakthrough of the complete elimination of suffering. Monks, with wisdom as their mortar, a disciple of the noble ones abandons the unwholesome, develops the wholesome, abandons the blameworthy, develops the blameless, and maintains their own purity. So I find this quite interesting, and that wisdom being the wall, for me was a little surprising, because a wall doesn't sound, like, to me, wisdom implies active and watchful quality. And a wall to me doesn't seem particularly active or watchful. But what it's, to me, what it's emphasizing here is that the wall is the final barrier, which keeps harmful things from getting in. And the quality of wisdom, the wisdom which knows arising and vanishing. In other words, the direct perception of impermanence, the impermanent, empty nature of all phenomena. This is the ultimate barrier, which keeps us from falling into attachment, falling into grasping, falling into clinging, and ultimately falling into the delusions which produce defilement in the first place. So when you clearly see that all things are impermanent, then you won't grasp at anything. And the Buddha says when you don't grasp at anything, then you can directly attain awakening. So then the Buddha says, these are the 7 good qualities that they have. And then he goes into describing the 4 jhanas. And I'll go through this fairly quickly because I speak about the jhanas quite often. In fact, I'm scheduled to talk about jhanas again fairly soon. So I won't go into a lot of detail on it today. But just to, before I launch into it, just to briefly state, so the jhana mind states, these are states of strong concentration, when one's mind does not move from its object. So when one is in meditation, one's mindfulness is extremely strong, and one's mind is completely steady and still. So not moving at all from the meditation object. And this is normally connected with Samma Samadhi, so the 8th step of the Noble Eightfold Path. And there's a number of suttas which indicate that it's necessary to have at least the first jhana, if not all 4, in order to attain awakening. Though there has been some debate about this over the last 2,500 years. So he says, what are the 4 jhanas? Superior mind states which are visibly pleasant, which they can easily attain without any trouble or difficulty. Monks, just as a royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of grass, wood, and water so that the residents can be happy, unworried, and comfortable when repelling outsiders. In the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, isolated from sensuality and from unwholesome things, attains and remains in the first jhana, which has thought, exploration, and the euphoria and pleasure produced by isolation. This makes them happy, unworried, and comfortable for approaching nibbana. So the first jhana is the first stage of deep samadhi, and therefore it's the least refined. It's still very refined compared to our ordinary state of mind, but it's less refined than the subsequent stages. So it's like the coarsest of the supplies that you need. So grass, wood, and water, your basic physical supplies for running a city. So the first jhana, again, he says it makes them happy, unworried, and comfortable for approaching nibbana. So just as a well-supplied city can be comfortable and untroubled as they fend off an attacking army. In the same way with first jhana, even though you're not enlightened yet, there's a deep sense of contentment and ease. It gives you this sense of joy and mental stability as you engage in the practices of awakening. So cultivating jhana is actually very important for our practice. If for no other reason than it infuses a sense of joy and serenity. So Buddhist practice can sometimes feel like this nightmarish uphill struggle, this seemingly interminable battle against this implacable foe, namely our own defilements. So being able to enter into deep, pleasant states of samadhi shows us that Buddhist practice is not just this relentless, horrific struggle, but in fact it's a joyful, pleasant activity of ever deepening happiness, of ever sharpening clarity of mind. Then the second one, he says, just as a royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of rice and grain so that the residents can be happy, unworried, and comfortable when repelling outsiders, in the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, with the pacification of thought and exploration, attains and remains in the second jhana, which has internal serenity, mental unification, no thought, no exploration, and has the euphoria and pleasure produced by concentration. This makes them happy, unworried, and comfortable for approaching nibbana. So the second jhana, the Buddha here is analogizing it to rice and grain. So rice and grain, it means your foundational foods. Carbohydrates, which have been the foundation of agricultural civilization for many thousands of years. And in fact, you can live almost entirely on rice and grain if you have to. So this is the foundation of survival for agricultural humans. So in the same way, the second jhana is when your samadhi is finally extremely stable. So in first jhana, there's still a little bit of background noise in the mind, what we call vitakka vichara, thought and exploration. In the second jhana, that's faded away. So the mind becomes extremely stable, peaceful, and joyful in the second jhana. And the third one, he says, just as a royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of seeds, beans, nuts, and legumes, so that the residents can be happy, unworried, and comfortable when repelling outsiders. In the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, based on dispassion towards euphoria, remains equanimous, mindful, and aware while experiencing pleasure with the body. They attain and remain in the third jhana, which the noble ones describe as an equanimous, mindful, and pleasant dwelling. This makes them happy, unworried, and comfortable for approaching nibbana. So this is getting a bit more refined. So the third jhana is when one has lost interest in the intense, electric, exciting euphoria that accompanies first and second jhana. And one is starting to become more inclined towards peacefulness of mind rather than towards joyfulness of mind. So the Buddha is analogizing this to seeds, beans, nuts, and legumes. So these are still foods, but they're foods which are more subtle and more refined. So it's more about getting variety in your diet rather than being the foundation of your diet. So in the same way, the third jhana is when you're refining the mind towards what this more subtle nourishment of serenity, rather than the more intense, exciting nourishment of euphoria. Then the fourth one, he says, just as a royal frontier citadel has stockpiled a lot of medicines, such as ghee, butter, oil, honey, sugarcane, and salt. I find it great that honey and sugar were considered medicines. That's wonderful. So that the residents can be happy, unworried, and comfortable when repelling outsiders. In the same way, monks, a disciple of the noble ones, based on abandoning pleasure, abandoning pain, and the previous disappearance of elation and depression, attains and remains in the fourth jhana, which is neither painful nor pleasant, and which has purity of mindfulness and equanimity. This makes them happy, unworried, and comfortable for approaching nibbana. So the fourth jhana is when one is focused entirely on equanimity of mind. Making the mind impossible to disturb, impossible to bother. So with fourth jhana is when one's concentration has reached the point where nothing can upset you or bother you or disturb you. No sensation of body or mind can bother you. There was an amusing interview a while back. So somebody was interviewing several Buddhist teachers who all said to be able to attain the four jhanas. So one of them was a monk and the others were lay people, as I recall. And they were asking each person to describe their experience. So one of the lay teachers was asked, like, so how long can you stay in fourth jhana? And this lay teacher said, oh, I can stay in fourth jhana for about 45 minutes, and then my knees start to hurt, so I have to get up. And the monk started laughing. Because if you're experiencing physical pain, you're definitely not in fourth jhana. It's doubtful whether you're even in first jhana. The usual understanding is that starting right from first jhana, there's no physical pain. Definitely not in fourth jhana. So this unfortunate teacher, through their own ignorance, outed the fact that they weren't actually able to attain jhana. Anyway, so this is one of the qualities of fourth jhana, is that one has completely left behind pain and pleasure, and the mind is in a completely stable state of equanimity, accompanied by incredibly sharp and precise awareness. So this is the most refined state of mind among the four jhanas, which is why the Buddha analogizes it to medicines, which are the most refined of the four kinds of supplies. So then the Buddha recaps. He says, monks, when a disciple of the noble ones has these 7 good qualities and can easily attain these 4 jhanas, superior mind states, which are visibly pleasant, without any trouble or difficulty, then, monks, they are called a disciple of the noble ones who cannot be affected by Mara, who cannot be affected by the evil one. So this is the end of the sutta. At this time, if you have any questions or comments, I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you.
Handayam namakataya sadhukaram nadamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
Thank you, Bhante, for sharing that sutta with us, and welcome to everyone else who's joined in. And there's a couple comments and questions. Angela has a question related to the Buddha being flawless. Did the Buddha not admit a mistake himself when he at first did not allow Yasodhara to join the Sangha, but later decided to allow and welcome women into the Sangha?
So, you have the story a little bit off. So first off, the story was that it was Mahapajapati who initially had asked to be ordained to join the monastic community. And the story goes that the Buddha initially said no, but then upon being asked a third time, then he said yes. So there was some scholarly debate these days as to whether this story actually happened or whether it was a later addition to the canon. And again, there's a lot of scholars who, based upon inconsistencies between that story and other elements of the canon, who think that this was something which was produced later. But either way, the thing of needing to ask 3 times is a very common feature in Buddhism. So it's a very common feature that if you make a request once, well, who doesn't sometimes say goofy things? If you make a request twice, Well, it's starting to get a little more clear that you really mean it. But if you make a request 3 times, then that indicates that you're really serious about what you're asking. Similarly, there's cases in the suttas where somebody comes to the Buddha and expresses their viewpoint, and the Buddha will ask them 3 times to repeat their opinion. Because getting them to say it 3 times, again, is making it clear that this actually is the opinion that they're holding. And then the Buddha will go on to debate the particulars of that opinion. So having somebody ask for ordination 3 times is not uncommon. Even to this day, that's a very common tradition in Buddhism, is that somebody needs to ask 3 times. So I wouldn't say that having it be only after the 3rd request, I wouldn't call that a mistake. There's other elements of the Buddha's life where one could point to some difficulty the Buddha had in teaching certain people. But I don't see that as being a problem with the Buddha, but rather the fact that he's talking to delusional people. And delusional people are remarkably difficult to get through to. So the Buddha was constantly trying to teach people who were deeply immersed in their own delusions. So his boundless wisdom, his perfection of teaching qualities, is still not enough if somebody is unwilling to relinquish their own delusions and see the truth as it is. So there's a lovely saying, another horse simile, to fit with the overall theme of the prevalence of horse similes in the suttas. You can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So in the same way, the Buddha is constantly pointing out water to all of us, and we're just standing there like, nope, 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 I'm not going to drink. Nope, don't want it. So again, I wouldn't call that a mistake or a flaw on the part of the Buddha, but rather it's a mistake on our part, in that when presented with the nourishing Dhamma, we refuse it. Even though we're dehydrated, we're starving, we refuse it. So that's our flaw, not the Buddha's flaw. Okay?
Bhante, actually, if I can just interject, I think that the person there is asking because in that particular story, the Buddha says, no, it's not true that the 3rd time, then he says yes as usual. Rather, Ananda has to convince him. And so then he acknowledges his mistake. Well, he doesn't really acknowledge his mistake, but then he changes his mind. So I think that's what the person is highlighting, the fact that if someone else convinces the Buddha that their previous statement is, was not correct, then that means that the Buddha is not really infallible.
Thank you, Ayasama, for bringing some more detail into this. Yeah, and that's exactly one of the reasons why many scholars say that there's something a bit off about that story, which casts some doubts upon its authenticity, because it doesn't sound like the conduct of the Buddha that we see throughout the rest of the suttas. It's a little bit out of line with the way the Buddha normally talks and interacts with others. It's out of line with the way the Buddha normally relates to people. Yeah, thank you.
And Roy has a question. Would you perhaps have a sequence of suttas to read after the Satipatthana that could best support a practitioner?
Yes, I do. So start by reading the Majjhima Nikaya, cover to cover. Then read the Samyutta Nikaya, cover to cover. Then read the Anguttara Nikaya, cover to cover. Bhante Sumita's laughing. Then read the Digha Nikaya, cover to cover. Then if you like, you can also read through the Khuddaka Nikaya, though that one's less important, which is actually why it's called the Khuddaka. Khuddaka means minor. So the Khuddaka Nikaya is the collection of minor books. But the other 4 are really important. Okay. And
Sake says, can a layperson develop all jhanas, and how does one develop Hiriyottapa?
Yeah, of course a layperson can develop all 4 jhanas. if you create the right conditions in your life. It's difficult to create those conditions as a layperson, but it's possible. It's possible. Long periods of retreat, very simple lifestyle, very uncluttered mind. Keep the 8 precepts at a minimum, have very few possessions, study the suttas all the time, meditate all the time, avoid frivolous conversation. Basically, live like a monk. So you can be a layperson as long as you're living as much like a monk as possible. And yeah, you can get the 4 jhanas. Yeah. But at that point, you might as well just become a monk. I mean, seriously. What was the other question?
How to develop Hiriyottapa.
So, Hiriyottapa, well, first off, read the suttas. So you have a clear sense as to what the Buddha meant when he said wholesome and unwholesome. Though fundamentally, wholesome is doing things which benefit people, both ourselves and others. And unwholesome is doing things which harm people, both ourselves and others. It's the most fundamental description. Then pay attention to what you're doing and notice how harmful things, harmful activities bring unhappiness to ourselves and others. And wholesome activities bring happiness to ourselves and others. And this will cultivate Hiriyottapa. So paying attention to what we're doing and paying attention to the consequences of what we're doing. Then built upon a foundation of knowledge of the suttas. This leads to Hiriyottapa.
And Charles Z asks, are purification and concentration synonymous when experiencing jhana? Do the jhanas arise only in formal meditation, or can they arise during everyday life?
Not sure what you mean by purification. So it's necessary, before one can enter even the first jhana, it's necessary to purify the mind of the 5 hindrances. So these coarse, unwholesome states of sexual interest, aversion, dullness, agitation, and skepticism. So you've got to clear those 5 coarse impurities from the mind before you can enter the first jhana. So if that's what you mean by purification. Concentration, on the other hand, I mean, there's many Pali words which can be translated as concentration. But in the context of entering jhana, unification of mind is perhaps a better term. So chitta se kagata, the unification of mind. So it's bringing the mind together into oneness, so that the mind is not scattered and dispersed and pointing every which way and moving all over the place, but the mind is completely unified, gathered together, collected together, which is another literal translation of samadhi, means collected together, gathered together, held together. Would be a very literal way of translating samadhi. So these are different things. Purification of mind is removing the hindrances so that the mind is less likely to splatter all over the place. And concentration or unification or stabilization of mind is collecting the mind all together so that it's completely gathered together on the object. So these are 2 different activities which are mutually supportive. So the more you purify your mind of the 5 hindrances, the easier it is to collect and unify the mind. And the more you collect and unify the mind, the less power the 5 hindrances will have. So these are basically two strategies towards approaching first jhana, is either to focus on purifying the mind of the 5 hindrances or to focus on collecting and unifying the mind. But ultimately, you're going to wind up doing both. It's just a matter of which one you focus on first. Okay.
And Kumu asks, has anyone compiled all the similes and analogies the Buddha used into one book? They're beautiful.
Great.
There actually is a book. There's a couple of books. My mind is blanking off the top of my head, but there are a couple of books I've seen in the past which are compilations of the Buddha's similes. So they exist, but I don't remember the titles. But if you look for them, I'm sure you'll find them.
And I forgot about the second part of Charles's question, which was, can the jhanas arise only in formal meditation or also in everyday life?
Usually they're spoken about as something that happens during formal meditation, because when you're engaged in other activities, the mind is moving. And in order to enter jhana, the mind needs to stop moving. So if you're washing dishes or driving a car, then you will not enter jhana. And in fact, if you enter jhana while driving a car, that would probably be disastrous. So I don't recommend trying. Yeah. So normally it's during sitting meditation, actually. Even walking meditation, there's too much activity. So there's debate about whether it's possible to even enter jhana during walking meditation, but usually the answer is no. Only when the body and mind are completely still can you enter jhana. So you can have a certain level of samadhi while engaging in activities, but it's not jhana. It's a more ordinary kind of samadhi. Okay?
And lots of thank yous. And Angela says thank you in reference to the Mahapajapati question. And Christopher says, as a peaceful tradition, isn't it at odds that the Buddha uses military imagery as examples?
No, because he's using things which people will understand. Actually, anyone who's practiced Buddhism for any length of time probably can relate very much to the combat similes, because it does often feel like we're fighting with our own mind, fighting with our own unwholesome habits and tendencies. So I actually totally get the military analogies. I'm like, yeah, I need to fortify this mind so I can fight off those defilements. I totally get it. And there was a very famous Thai forest monk recently passed away, who was believed to be an arhat, Ajahn Mahabua. And before he became a monk, he was a kickboxer. So he practiced Thai kickboxing, which is an extremely brutal martial art. And then when he became a monk, since that was his background, he was constantly using his experiences as a martial artist, as a kickboxer, again, this very brutal combat form. He was using that as a way of teaching Dhamma. So he would say things like, you need to kill those defilements, drag them to the ground and crush them. So talking about this kind of fierce intensity with which to approach our practice, as though it was a matter of life and death. So when something is a matter of life and death, then you actually really put your all into it. So Buddhist practice is not meant to just be some cute little hobby. Like I paint some unicorns and then I do a little bit of Buddhist meditation and then I go for a walk. And no, it's meant to be something which we take very seriously in a lighthearted and joyful way. We really commit thoroughly to it. So that's the thing, is that when somebody is in combat, they're giving it their all. They're fully invested in it because you really don't have any other choice. Otherwise, you're just going to get defeated or killed. So the use of military imagery, I actually personally find very powerful because to me it helps bring up the sense of urgency and importance to the practice. It's like, no, you don't want to let the invaders get inside your mind. Just as if the enemy gets inside the city, they can cause incredible damage, raping and looting and burning and destroying. In the same way, if you let defilements invade your mind, they're going to cause incredible damage in there as well. You don't want that to happen. So there's this imagery of fortifying the mind, just as you fortify a citadel against enemies. For me, this is actually a really powerful metaphor, which inspires me to practice more sincerely. So no, I don't see anything strange at all about the Buddha's use of military metaphors.
And there's a question from Lel who says, to reach nirvana, is sustenance, physical health, the purest way to experience the fourth jhana?
You technically don't need to be physically healthy to attain awakening, and you don't need to be physically healthy to attain jhana. And it's helpful. There's a few suttas where the Buddha mentions that being physically healthy is a support to one's practice, but it's not a requirement. It's not a requirement at all. Yeah, so it's important not to be too obsessed with physical health, and keep your body healthy, of course, because it's useful, it's helpful, but it's not the main point. The main point is having a wholesome mind. That's the important thing. Okay.
And there's a question from Ray, but it's not related to this sutta. So Ray, perhaps you can save it for Friday evening when we have mock chat, or you can send us an email at info@mtcloud.org and we can answer your question. But it seems like there are no more online questions or comments. Not sure if there's anything from the audience here. So it looks like we can end for this morning. Thanks everyone for joining in. You can return this evening at 7:30 p.m. for some guided meditation as well as a Dhamma talk. But for now, we can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy the rest of your day.